Okay. We're just getting ready to get started. We got one more minute left before the official start time. If you're watching this, make sure again, give me a comment. Let me know you're watching. As always, feel free to comment during the live stream if you have questions, if you want clarity on anything that I'm saying, or just want to say hi. Please comment on the Patreon post or on YouTube, and that will I'll see it, and it'll motivate me to keep doing these. So thank you guys for joining in. I can see that I've got 4 of you now, so very cool. Leave a like and comment. I'm experimenting with some new technology. So I'm using a program that's doing the live stream. It allows me to do some kind of cool things, like I can fade to a title screen. Oh, fancy. Okay. So anyways, I can also potentially be doing live video analysis. I haven't worked that out yet, so if that's something you'd be interested in, let me know. Now, this doesn't get me around my internet quality. The internet where I live, I'm very rural. It's not the best. So if I am skipping or a little blurry, just know that that's because of the lag on my internet. It's not because of the program I'm using. Okay, let me see. I'm gonna try to send a video link to someone. Give me 1 second. The 5 people who are watching, let me know who you are. Who's watching? Comment on Patreon and I'll see it. I've got a few questions today. Not a whole lot, but I know that I can definitely ramble on for a long time on just that. But that said, I may do a live rant. So who knows? Hopefully the internet works good enough for me to do that. Okay. So, let's get right started. The first question is given to me by Amy, who says that her dog often, but not always, skips the first 2 containers and then starts searching. I take note and make sure that you come back to them because I don't want to pull him around when he's just starting. I have the gut feeling that I should spiral and make him check those first. Yes, no, yes in training, no in trials. I think that's a good question, and I think that it's important to note that it depends on where you are in your training with your dog about what decisions you make. It also depends on what the parameters of the search are. So obviously, when you're talking about a normal nosework trial, the container searches you're going to be doing, you're always going to have way more than enough time to go back and double check your threshold. If this were a time challenge, if you didn't have that time, then yeah, turn around and make them check those now, right? But the let me answer that question now. Quinn is a young adolescent male dog, so should you spiral him back? Here's the pros and cons of making each decision. The con of letting him skip is that you promote him to continue skipping the first 2 containers, right? That you and not only do you promote that, he may get worse. He may skip the first 3 and then the first 4 until he's running to the end and working it backwards. It may allow him to. He's not searching, right? So because if he were searching, he would check the first 2. So it encourages not searching, not just skipping. It encourages not searching. Okay. The pros are you let the dog be more independent. The dog isn't gonna worry about you handling them. Maybe it allows them to be more odor obedient because maybe he's running past the first 2 because he caught odor. Those are all pros and cons. Now, let's say you spiral him back. So the pros of that are you would not miss your threshold, right? And you're encouraging good search habits. It is covering as a Band-Aid over what should be a training issue. It should be just, there should be more threshold container searches when you're training him, so that the threshold is an exciting place, right? And those are the main pros and cons. Now, let's look at some other things too, which maybe, why is he skipping? Maybe he's skipping because you're starting at the start line, right? As opposed to coming up to the containers. Now, I don't know if that's the case for you or not in any particular trial, but I know that's the case for a lot of people. Most people just start at the start line no matter how far away the containers are, and they let the dog just run past, as opposed to taking the dog up to the first container and letting the dog search from there. That may be something that you experiment with at time. Then you won't have to spin him around all the time. You could also experiment with starting at different angles. Instead of starting straight down the line of containers, how about sending him into the containers and then turn? That could make a big difference too. So it's one, I don't think it's a good thing to encourage him to burst past containers. But two, the solution to that isn't necessarily to in the moment spiral him. The first solution is to train a stronger threshold. The second solution is maybe think about finding a different way to start that encourages the correct type of searching you're looking for. I always feel like when I'm spinning the dog around that to me, in fact, I have a video that I'm going to post soon of my dog doing that in her most recent trial. I spin her around like 4 or 5 or 6 times on a vehicle search. To me, it's like that points out that I had really bad pattern training. Like it was not what it should be. That's why I'm constantly having to fix it, right? So to me, it's an indication that we need to go back to simple pattern training, getting the dog to stick to thresholds. And that's a normal problem for a young dog to have. And it's not someone that's necessarily fixed immediately, but it's worth investing the time setting lots and lots of threshold hides. I would say that you should always be a threshold hide in every search you do. That, for now, that would be a good place to start. So again, if you want clarification on that, if you have more questions, feel free to ask it in the comments. But I will move on to the next question. So this is, in the most recent patterning video, you mentioned decision fatigue. Should we ever train specifically for decision stamina? And if so, what would that look like? That's from Wendy. Let me start by talking about what she's talking about, what decision fatigue is, and why it matters. Okay. Decision fatigue is an idea that's in psychology, and the idea is that you have a certain amount of energy to invest in decision making. And if you're investing a lot of that energy deciding what to eat for breakfast and what clothes to wear, then later on in the day, when you're running out of energy, you're going to make poorer decisions. Okay, when it's important stuff like, should we take a vacation or not? Or should I propose to my significant other? Things like that, right? Because it takes the same energy to make both of those decisions, sadly. So in the professional world and in schools, they've shown that children and office workers perform their jobs better if they're forced to wear uniforms. So in other words, if you take the decision away about what you're going to wear, so it's not a decision to be made, you're going to wear the uniform. When you take that decision away from children, they make better decisions on tests and in study and all sorts of things. So that's an interesting finding. And in my patterns video, I said that asking your dog to make decisions like should we go left or right, asking them to make those decisions costs the dog energy. And I really believe that. So then this is an important question. Does that mean we should prevent the dog from making any decisions? Absolutely not. In fact, you should absolutely build stamina for decision making in training. And I do that by building independence. In training, I like to make my dog make every decision, right? It's like, I'm going to give you nothing. Now, when I'm training people, I show them how to handle in a trial. That's an important part. But when I'm training my own dogs, I'll clip them off leash. I sit down with a beer and I just watch them make decisions on their own. That's all up to them. But then when they get to a trial, I start making a whole bunch of decisions. So I decide we're going to go left instead of right. And what that does is if the dog has no preference, if the dog doesn't care whether we go left or right, they say, oh, that's a good idea, we'll go left, right? Now, however, if I say we're going left, but the dog says I'd rather go right, the dog can make that decision. Great. Oh, awesome. And I agree with it. I say, yeah, that's a good decision, and I follow them. But now I've just removed the decisions from the dog that the dog doesn't care about. And they're only making the decisions that are important to them, which that's important to me. So absolutely you should train decision fatigue for the dog in training. Even if that will mean that you're going to be lazier as a handler. And that's hard for people to do, especially when they're training with other people. It's difficult to watch your dog struggle, to watch your dog take longer on a problem that other people are doing. People want to jump in and save the dog, and I think that's a bad instinct. Don't save your dog. Let him make the decision. And he takes time now. It's fine. I mean, obviously, if you're taking up too much class time, then you got to do what you got to do. But I would be more likely with my own dog. If my dog's struggling, I'm more likely to put them in their crate than to help them. Because I want to just let my dog make their own decisions and build stamina. And I don't want them to ever look to me for solutions. So that's something to consider in training. Because people make decisions for their dog in training all the time. And I think that's a mistake. And because what happens when you compete is you made all the decisions for your dog in training. And then when you get to a trial, you stop making decisions for the dog because you don't know where the hide is. And now the dog is being forced to make decisions for the first time in their life. Right? And that's a real problem. It's not the right way to do things. I think you should make the dog make all the decisions in training and then not make very many decisions in a trial. That's a better way of handling the dog. Very good question. So, next question. This is from Irv. If a dog has experience with patterning, so this is, and I have a video of Irv that I'm going to post soon, probably in the next patterns video. It shows the product of doing this pattern training that I described to a high level, and it's a very impressive video. So I'm really excited about posting it. But he says, okay, so if the dog has experience with patterning, but has a run where he doesn't follow the patterning, do you let him continue or do you remove him from the search and do a restart? And this is obviously in training. This may not be the most profound question in the world, but it's one I confront every once in a while. Again, this is when you are training with the specific goal of practicing patterning. And I think, again, there are pros and cons to both decisions. And you don't always know what the right answer is in the moment. You only know after the fact based on how it goes. And I think what makes it a good decision is what the dog is thinking when they're making the decision to break their pattern. If the dog knows their pattern, why would they break it? So there's only a few reasons. It could be that the dog got distracted. And if the dog gets distracted, then you could put them away, theoretically. You could say, hey, you're either working or you're not. So to me, it's the same as deciding to pee in a search. It's like, hey, you've got choices here. You can either work urgently to find odor, or you can not work at all. And that's what I tell my dogs. Now, maybe the reason he broke his pattern was because the odor was working in a strange way, and he's information gathering. So he might be wandering around the room like, there's some weird air current here, and I need to work out the air current. And that is taking priority for me over working the wall. And this is where your intuition is really important. Do you think your dog is working, or do you think your dog is not working? If you don't think your dog is working, then you really can put them away. But if you think your dog is working, then I think you should leave them alone. And what I would do is I leave them alone. You do what you need to do, work out the problem, they find the hide. And then what we do is wherever they broke the pattern, we're going to do an intensive training session right there to make sure, just in case I'm wrong, I'm giving the dog the benefit of the doubt. We're going to really, really overwork that one area so that that area is less likely to be skipped. So that's my personal take on it. I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer. There's only right or wrong answers in hindsight, right? We can say that was a bad choice in hindsight. But it's very hard to predict which choice is going to be the right or wrong one in the moment. You have to use your intuition, and it's a gamble. You don't know whether it's going to be right or wrong until after. So it's a good question. Okay, another question from Amy. She broke her foot right before her NW1. Congratulations on passing your NW1. And she's hoping to get a walking boot. Does having a distraction like that, bulky, different gait, sound, and smell, help with my dog's training, or do I risk creating a negative association? I think that there aren't bad distractions to add in training. I really don't. I think that there are dogs who emotionally are not prepared to handle it. That's for sure, right? And if you have one of those dogs, or if you find yourself in that moment, you will become immediately aware of that, right? And if you're not aware with fear thresholds, then it's a good time to, familiarize yourself with the literature on this. But basically, you'll know the dog, if you push your dog into too much of a fearful state, the dog will not be able to think about anything else. When I work with fearful dogs, one of the things I'll do regularly is give the dog a treat, just periodically, randomly. Okay, and what I'm looking for is if a dog happily takes a treat and eats it, then they're not too far over threshold. But if they won't take a treat, that's a sure sign the dog is way past their threshold. So if you're ever worried in a search, like I'm not sure if my dog's over threshold, offer them a treat. If they eat it, you're probably fine. I mean, this is not a hard and fast rule, but I definitely don't see any reason why he shouldn't be able to deal with you wearing a boot, especially considering he's going to have to deal with it anyways. You're going to be walking around with that boot anyways. So why shouldn't he? I mean, maybe walk around with it for a day or two before you try it in a nosework search, right? But he's going to have to get over it. Might as well make instead of worrying about giving nosework a negative association, maybe you should think, hey, maybe a nosework is a good way to give a positive association to the boot, right? So absolutely, I would be doing that. And I would be doing that even if I didn't break my foot. If I had a boot, I'd put it on and walk around like that, get the dog used to it. I don't think you can over socialize a dog to these kinds of things. I think that's a great thing to do. Crutches, an umbrella, all of these things you should practice having. I've done searches where it's pouring down rain and I've had an umbrella while I was searching. And the dogs who couldn't deal with that, they really struggled. But my dogs, because I'm constantly throwing things at them, searches where I'm wearing a headlamp, things like that. Just I'm constantly doing stuff like that they're like, fine, that's cool. New stuff is usually more fun anyways. So absolutely do it. And I would say like, I want to, my dog has never been around gunfire before, so I'm going to set up a nosework search near the gunfire. I would say instead of testing it, see what he does around gunfire first without nosework. Then you'll know whether it's an appropriate distraction to do in nosework. But I don't think a boot would come anywhere close to. I mean, don't step on him. If you step on him, that could really create a negative association. But other than that, you're probably fine. So I see a lot of people are tuned in. Welcome, guys. Make sure to say hi in the chat stream. I'm sorry the internet is going so slow. Is the internet going slow for everyone or just some of you? Okay. Okay, next question. Okay, this is a big, long question about rewards and reward timing. I wonder if there's any way I can boost my internet speed. I don't think there is. The best thing I can do is just close all these things. Let's see if that helps. Okay, so the next is a 4-part question about rewarding. So the first question is, what impact does the value to the dog of the treats have in both practice and at NW's 1, 2, and 3 trials, and why? So that's a really good question. The value of the treats will affect the intensity with which the dog pursues that treat, right? So In fact, one of the things that's important to recognize is that rewards and punishment have quality to them. So if the reward is too high of too low, it won't affect the behavior. And so the standard model for this is you're training a dog to sit, and if you're using a piece of lettuce, the dog won't be interested enough in the reward to perform the behavior. Okay, so you want to optimize the treat value. So if you use a piece of kibble, well, then maybe the dog's more interested. If you use a piece of hot dog, the dog's more interested and sits more actively. But if you go too far, either with punishments or rewards, you make them too valuable, you will end up creating undesirable behaviors. So, for instance, if I try to get a dog to sit while holding a whole turkey, right, as the reward, I'm probably going to create a dog that's jumping up at me, not a dog that sits, right? Now, if I have great timing and he sits and I throw the whole turkey at him, maybe I'll have a really good sit. But my point is that when you're in a trial, and a lot of people do this, and they use a really high value treat that they don't ordinarily train with, you really might create a problem because you're creating a new behavior that you didn't expect. So, for instance, you may be creating a dog who just stares at you instead of looks for odor. That's a real problem that a lot of people have had. I did that with my first trial. I used way too high value treats that I didn't train with, and the dog just couldn't stop thinking about the food. In training, on the other hand, if you have the time to make the dog work through it, or deliver the treat in such a way that he wasn't thinking about the treat, gets the odor, and gets delivered a very high value treat, what you're doing is you're charging the marker. The odor is a secondary reinforcer, so you're charging that. And if that odor gets associated with really high value treats, their performance will improve over time. Absolutely. It's important to realize, too, that NWs 1, 2, and 3 are different levels, and I'm glad you separated them out, because this question is from Linda, by the way. NW1, you know there's only one hide. So what that means is when you get to NW1, you could get away with a very high-value treat, a very large high-value treat, and just not pull it out until you find the hide. And when you call alert and they say yes, you just give them that whole big treat. And you're off the clock. But when you get to NW2 and 3, when there's multiple hides, you need to reward and then keep searching. So then it's a time cost, right? So I think you should think about rewarding differently at the different levels. And if you go back and start doing element trials, you should change the way you reward, because you're off the clock when you're rewarding. So you should definitely reward more at level 1. Or if a level 2 that only has one hide. Or a level 2 that has 2 hides, reward heavily on the second hide after your time stopped, right? And that goes for AKC and USCSS trials if you go back and start doing all their novice stuff. The second part of the question is, what impact does feeding multiple treats have in practice and at Nosework 2 and 3 trials? And as a sub-question to that, what do you recommend to a person who always drops treats? So multiple treats, and it's important that if you have 10 treats into your hand and you give it to the dog, then you've given your dog one treat. Okay, multiple treats means one at a time treats. And what that does, when you reward your dog with multiple treats, what that does is it increase the duration the dog is willing to stay at the odor. Okay, so a higher value treat will make the dog want to get to the odor faster. Multiple treats makes the dog stay at odor longer. Okay, which is an extra good thing to do at level 1 in competition, because you want the dog to stay at odor in a trial. And one of the big problems at a trial is that the dog runs odor. Definitely do that in training. My rule in class is a minimum of 3 treats every time they find a hide. So it's 1, 2, 3, and then they're done. Okay? And that at home, you should be doing more than that. But in class, for time reasons, you should be doing 3. And then the third question, what impact does the speed of the treat delivery have in both practice and trials? Each one of these questions, it gives the dog more information, but basically, let me answer. What do I recommend to a person who always drops treats? When you're training, don't worry about it. Just focus on giving the dog high-value treats, a lot of them. Don't worry about dropping treats. When you go to a trial, you have to decide what's important to you. If it's important to you to earn placements, okay, then work hard to not drop treats. But you have to understand, when you drop a treat at a trial, the only thing that happens to you is you get a fault. You will still pass the search. If you drop a treat in all 4 searches, then you don't get your title. That's true. But that said, if you don't care about placements, right? Because people always tell me, "Oh, I don't care about winning. I just want a title." Okay, great. So then stop. Don't care about faults. You can get faults in 3 different searches. So don't worry about dropping treats if it means you can reward better. Don't worry about your dog going under the car if you think it's safe, right? Because those are just a fault, right? It's not the end of the world. Don't worry about your dog going through the cones. But the thing is, people say they don't care about placing, but then they still worry about faults, and that bothers me. We should be intellectually consistent. I would say, if you don't care about placing, then don't worry about dropping treats, except in one search. In one search, you have to make sure you don't drop a treat, and all the other ones just reward like crazy, so that and don't care about dropping because it's only one fault. So anyways, speed of treat delivery. What effect does that have in practice in a trial? So if the value creates more intensity to go to odor, and the multiple treats increases the more the dog wants to stay at odor, then the speed of treat delivery increases the clarity or the understanding the dog have about what exactly got rewarded. So when does the dog think, I got rewarded for hitting the edge of odor, for putting my nose on the tin, for looking at my owner, for sniffing the tin? Not because putting your nose on the tin is not the same as sniffing the tin, right? So the speed, or I think more accurately, the timing of the treat delivery increases clarity. Okay? So value increases intensity, multiple treats increases duration, timing increases clarity. Okay? And then in my interview with Jason, he talked about other choices rather than just rushing into the reward. Absolutely. So being delayed to reward, it just changes what the dog thinks they're getting rewarded for. If you do it right, a delayed reinforcer can be a very powerful tool. You can create a dog that really sticks to odor and waits for you to deliver the reward. You can create duration by delaying the treat, but you might also create scratching or picking up the odor or looking at the handler or any number of other behaviors. So what's important is to think about the clarity of the reward and what you're communicating, because the treat is how you communicate with the dog, because they don't speak English. It would be easy if we could just tell them, I want you to put your nose on the odor. If you could literally just tell that to them, they would just do it. But because we have to reward through treats, they're like trying to guess. It's like, oh, is it my nose on the odor, or is it just my chin on the odor? I've seen a lot of dogs doing this recently. They're not even, because they're trying to look at the treat, so they end up touching the odor with their chin. They're not sniffing. That's a shaped behavior, and I think that's going to become a problem for you later. And you can be early with the treat too. You can be super early. For some dogs, that's really important. If they're kind of disinterested in hunting, then you can rush in to reward at the edge of odor, and we're not talking about placement, just timing. And that can build some drive, like, wow, this odor thing is good. Whenever I get in odor, I get rewarded. So that can be a good thing too. But just understand that what you're doing is you're building clarity about what it is that the dog needs to do to earn that treat. And the last part of the question is, what impact does where the treat is delivered have in both NW1, 2, and 3 trials and practice? So this is about reward placement. Reward placement's a little more complicated and a little bit more subtle. If I tried to summarize what I think reward placement does, is reward placement affects the not the clarity of behavior, but it affects the muscle memory of the dog. Is the dog going to lean into odor or lean towards their handler? Right? Is the dog going to look at you or look at the odor? Right? So it's I don't think it activates their cognitive processes like timing does. It's more classically conditioning the dog about where the treat's going to appear. Because we care so much about the dogs getting to source, because that's the requirement of our organization that we compete in, I think that reward placement is really important. I think that she adds to this question, by the way, that she knows of a person, a teacher with many dogs with titles from many organizations and national participant, who does not always reward at the source at trials in order to be faster. I think that if you do good in 2 of these categories, at least, you're probably going to have a fine dog, right? You're going to have a dog who, if you just worry about the value and rewarding multiple treats, you're going to have a dog that can pass at a trial. If you just worry about the timing and the placement, but don't worry about the value of the treats or rewarding multiple times, you're probably going to do just fine. Okay? But if you want that above and beyond performance, you're going to think critically about all 4 of these areas so that you can you can have the best possible performance from your dog. Okay? So again, to summarize, and I'm not saying that people who choose to do it differently, who are making a conscious choice to do it differently, they're not wrong. They're doing that for a reason, right? I do what I do for a reason. But if you haven't critically thought about these things, even if you're doing it right, you're doing it wrong. Okay? Because you need to think. You need to think about these things. So sum up, value of the treat increases intensity. Multiple treats increases duration at source. Treat timing affects clarity and understanding of the job. Treat delivery affects the orientation of where the dog is going to, thinks the reward is going to come from, the handler or the source. Good question. I'm watching the my internet speed, and it's going everywhere from below 100 to over 2,000, like in terms of speed, kilobytes per second. It's like, why is it varying so much? It's crazy how dramatic it is. But anyways, this question, another question from Irv. What do you think about resetting the dog in the middle of a search? I'm wondering specifically about a scenario where you think of a pattern search would be advantageous, but the dog is searching in a random manner. Encouraging the dog to resume a pattern search by pointing and recueing is relatively benign and unobtrusive. But what do you think about physically halting the dog and restarting in the middle of the search? Of course, you're interrupting the search, that's possibly negative, but you're also interrupting a random navigation through the search, which is possibly positive. Of course, I'm talking about dogs that are resilient and will readily resume the search after being restrained. And then if I think it's a good thing to interrupt the dog searching, do you think it should be practiced in training a lot? So one thing that I want to be really clear about is that this isn't a patterns question. This is a strategy question. Strategy questions are important, but I want to make a clear distinction between patterning and strategy. Patterning is how you set hides in order to create a thought process in the dog, right? Strategy is what decisions do I make while searching, and how do I know which decision is the right decision? And my answer to this is almost always you've got to use your intuition, and you don't know whether it was right or wrong until after the fact. I think there is a time and a place when you should. I've seen people restart their dogs, hard restart them, like break them out of whatever they're doing and reset them, and it's really paid off. And I've seen the people do that, and it's really not paid off. It's not something I would practice a lot in training for sure. I don't like interrupting my dog. I like letting them work on their own, and I'd rather try to affect them with hide placement rather than handling, right? Is there a time where I would do that in trial? Oh, 100%. I would, but I wouldn't say that was the right choice. I would almost be tempted to say it's an emotional choice I'm making in the moment because of nerves, not because of trial nerves, but because I'm afraid of missing a hide or I'm afraid of falsing. So I snap not the dog out of it as much as I'm snapping myself out of it, right? And if the dog is really working erratically, chaotically, then you should ask yourself, why is the dog working chaotically? It's probably something I'm doing. So I do think resetting the dog can help, but I think it helps the handler more than it helps the dog. So I think that it can be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. And you just have to know your dog really well. You have to know the environment you're searching really well, and you have to know yourself really well. It's not something I would practice. I might do it once or twice so that I know how my dog's going to respond. But it's not something I would practice regularly. Not at all. I want my dog to search based on hide placement, not based on handler interference. Okay, so now I've just finished my backlog of questions. So I'm going to go through the comments now and see what comments I've gotten during the live stream and answer those questions. So I've got a question from Linda. Yeah, so she noticed that in Soma's container search with Lumi, the one I posted recently, that you handled the leash so it dragged behind you. I've seen others do it and wonder what the benefit is. Do you do this every time and with all elements? And if it were me, I'm sure it would catch under the tire of a vehicle search, upset containers if they're not in rows, but circles, or trip myself for sure. Yeah. For one, I'm going to post my analysis of that video. One of the things I do say is my leash was too long. My leash was absolutely too long for that search. I didn't have the leash I wanted. I normally work containers on an 8-foot leash, but I only had a 15, and I had the 15 that goes for my other dog actually. So, but either way, I always drag the leash behind me. That's the style that I prefer. I'm definitely not saying that it's right or wrong. I definitely think the leash getting caught in the tire of a vehicle, upsetting containers, and tripping yourself are all super valid concerns. They are very valid concerns. And the other method that I see people use is to have coils of leash in their hand. That comes with its own set of problems. And for me, I don't trip easily, and I have fairly good leash control, so I can flick it out of the way of a tire or things like that, or not disturb containers. So it isn't a problem for me. So I can get away with that. But I'm not necessarily... I would experiment with it on your own to see if it works for you. But you have to really, really give it a good try. Don't just do it once and say it didn't work. It didn't work because you're not used to it. But it is what I do always, and it works really well for me. I used to coil it, and that didn't work as well. It was just too much to think about the coils, and I never released out enough, or I released too much, or it didn't work for me. And I like the way this just flows out of the leash, out of my hand, and I can draw it back in and just ignore the excess leash. I actually really like that. It's something that people do a lot in tracking. But again, in tracking, there's not a lot of objects for the leash to get caught on. And I think that is a super valid concern and worth pointing out. And I think my leash was too long. So I'm agreeing with you, but it is the style of leash handling I use. I am planning on putting a video up on leash handling. I think there are a lot of different choices that handlers can make about leash handling. And you have to experiment with different styles of leashes and styles of leash handling to find the one that suits you and your style of movement and your dog. So, that's important. Here's a question from Martha. How does one help a dog who loves bouncing around pooling odor to move through that quicker? I've gotten fairly good at recognizing when it's not at source, but in trials, okay. That's a good question. I think you should know how long does it take your dog to work pooling odor in practice. And so let's say I set up a pooling odor problem in training, and let's say it takes my dogs 10 seconds to work through the pool and drive to source. Okay? If it takes 10 seconds of practice, I will double that for competition. It's going to take me 20 seconds. So if I want it to take 10 seconds in training, I have to train so that it takes 5 seconds in trial and in training. Sorry. If I want it to take 10 seconds in trial, then I have to get it to 5 seconds in training. One thing that I would highly recommend is have lots of residual odor out. So one thing I'll do with my dog, because I had a serious pooling odor problem with my dog for a while. I would put out an odor, and then I'd let it sit. I'd cook it for 20, 30 minutes before I run my dog. But before I get my dog, I'd pick up the hide and I'd move it somewhere else. So now there's a big pool of odor sitting where that odor was. And then I'd let my dog work. And I'd let her work that out. It took however long it took for her to find out that actually it had moved over there. And doing that over and over again. So there are two ways to build speed in a dog, in my opinion. There might be a few tricks other than that, but there are two ways. One is to increase the dog's motivation and drive. So you do that with pairing, with higher value treats, with sterner consequences. So, you could go in and say, if you take 10 seconds to work the pulling odor problem, I'm going to put you away. And then I'm going to let you work it again. And so the dog learns, wow, I'm on a clock. And if I take 10 seconds, then I get put in my crate. And the dog will work faster. Some dogs, not all dogs. So that's one way to increase speed, is build motivation. You do that by increasing the value of the reinforcer and increasing the consequence, the negative side of the consequences, which is in nose work, only being put away. The second way to build speed is to increase the dog's fluency. If they've seen it 100 times, they're going to do the problem faster, right? So a good example of that is the first time your dog ever did a box search, right? They did not, well, maybe your dog didn't. My dog didn't go right to the box and alert. No, they went around and they were like, what are these boxes? And they had to figure out what seams were. And they checked different boxes and they caught it in the wind and they went past the box, and it took them a long time. But now when you put a box search out, the dog's like, boom, there it is. It's fast. Why is it fast? It's fast because they've developed fluency. They've seen that enough times that they go faster. So you need to make sure that you develop that fluency, because if you haven't developed the fluency, then you can't expect it to go faster. That's for sure. Now, if this is a problem that only exists in trial, then we have to ask, what is the handler doing that is making this harder for the dog? So maybe in training, you're helping the dog with pulling odor, and then in trial, you're not able to help them because you're not sure if it's a pull or a source. In which case, you need to stop helping them in training. If you have a problem that only occurs in trial, the problem is almost always the handler, right? Because that's the only thing different about trial than in training, is that the handler is under a certain amount of stress. So if it is happening in training, then those are the two ways to solve it. Increase drive, increase fluency. Very good question. Thank you. If anybody has any other questions, I'll take them now. I'm thinking about doing, well, we'll have to see how if we can get our internet working better, but where we are, it's not very good. Maybe I can do one of these somewhere where there's a more stable internet source. But how many of you, if you guys would be interested in seeing a live stream video analysis? I'm thinking about, I've got several trial videos that I have, but I probably will never get around to actually reviewing them, at least not anytime soon. But I could sit down for 30 minutes, an hour, however long it takes, and just literally analyze all my, several competition videos. If that would be interesting to you, let me know. And let me know, if there were other things that you'd like to see live streamed. We are going to try to live stream classes again, but we need to fix we need to have a better mic that can work outdoors, which is not easy to find. I have to do some research for that. But yeah, so thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you have any more questions, I've got a few more minutes left before I have to go pick up Natalie from the airport. So I'm more than happy to take them. Other than that, you guys are awesome. Thanks so much for tuning in. Again, if you're watching this, make sure to, in the comments, say hi, so that I know you watched. If you have questions, you keep sending them to me, and next month we'll have another live stream question and answer period. And your questions, I'll start putting them on the list now. These were some great questions this time around. I really enjoyed answering these questions. Okay. Awesome. Thank you, guys.